Hello Booktubians, this is a non-spoiler review for Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Sanderson. You rest assured you will not be spoiled with this book except for a few minor details in the course of this video. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Hello Booktubians, we are going to be reviewing Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Sanderson. General thoughts about this book. This has to be one of my favorite Cosmere books, and again, just like I mentioned, I always talked about it with my friends and such when I read Tress. I did not expect that book to be what it was, and I did not expect to like it as much. This book really just puts you in this sort of like Neon City kind of vibe, and I did not know I wanted that. I did not know I liked that. I did not know I liked romance until I read this book, because I think the two characters involved in this romance are genuinely just so fun to, like, it's one of those books where you just like spending time with the characters. You like when they're spending time together. You're invested in their interactions, their bickering, their heart to hearts, and I think that's, I guess that's what makes a good romance. I mean, again, I don't have a lot of experience reading romances, so I have no aside from the romances that exist in like the books that I've already read, I don't have much to compare it to. But all I know is I was invested, and if you're invested, I mean, you must be doing something right? This book also has, I would say, one of the more unique plots and one of the more unique, I guess, magic systems / worlds. And I think that's where these secret projects so far with Tress and with this kind of excel, is that Sanderson just gets to flex. Like, that's it. He just gets to flex. He doesn't have to be bogged down by any of the greater, grander schemes of the Cosmere. He can just be like, I'm going to make a random world that does follow the system of Cosmere laws and such, and the cosmology and whatnot, but I'm just gonna flex, and that's what he does. The world building, it pretty much takes place in two primary locations, very different from each other, and I would say that he does it well, and it feels like you wake up in, Painter and Yumi's lives, and you go through their day, and it feels like you've known them for a long time, despite them only being in this book. And that would lead me to my next point, is it works as a really good standalone. There are a lot more Cosmere references in this, with mainly like 2 or 3 primary things in the book that persist. They're not just like throwaway lines like they were in like Tress, but they are actually pivotal to the main story. And so I would say this is less friendly for non-Cosmere readers. I would not recommend this as a starter, just because there's so many drops, the big Cosmere-related elements, story elements. So this is definitely more catered to a Cosmere fan than Tress was. So that is something that I want to point out. I would say that would go into like my slight nitpick. It's hard to fault the book for being, so heavily reliant on Cosmere stuff when it is a Cosmere book, so you're not going to judge book 10 of a series poorly because it has books 1 through 9 relevant to it. So it's a little weird when it's part of like this grand universe. So that's why I call it a nitpick. But honestly, aside from that, there is nothing bad I have to say about this. It is a easy 5 out of 5, genuinely one of my favorite Cosmere books. And I would say going into the positives is like the next step, because there's no other negatives. The positives, well, there are many. And I would say, to keep it non-spoiler, the vibes. That's it. Like the way it is written, it's written really well. Like, I mean, there's like a scene where he describes the falling rain and like causing like rippling effects on the neon lights that's being reflected. I'm butchering the phrase, but oh my god, when I read that, I was like, made my brain tickle. And there's tender moments that he just slows the heck down and just focuses on. He makes you care about like really mundane things, and that's the thing that this book does really well. It's a fantasy book, barely. It's like, it doesn't have any of the fantasy tropes aside from like that one magic system that would never happen in real life, obviously. And maybe the end is like a fantasy, climax, if you will, which that can mean anything. But what I mean is that the moment to moment is what you read these books for, or this book, I mean. It's not a world-ending plot in the way that you would expect a fantasy book to be. It is, you're so focused on these two characters and their interactions that anything from like eating a bowl of noodles to like going to hang out with your friends suddenly becomes the mainstay of why you're reading this. And again, I'm someone that I didn't expect to like something like that. I like my big dragons and wars and epic climaxes. I love my, unrealistically daring heroes somehow succeeding. That's what I like. But so for me to read this and then be invested to the level that I was, I think that says a lot about the quality of the book, about how good Sanderson as a writer is when he tries to go out of his comfort zone. And he'll have downsides, of course, any writer does, but like the fact that he nailed the atmosphere and the investment of these characters, or from the reader at least, I think that is why it's a 5 out of 5 for me. It exceeded my expectations. In terms of I mentioned that it's a more involved plot and such. I'm not going to go into much detail, but it is very much a culture clash kind of book. And I think it's one of those tropes in fantasy and really anything, and even sci-fi, that just never gets old for me. When you take a certain culture, you develop it, you take a second culture, you develop it, and you have them clash through the main characters. It just never gets old. And I think the way it's done in the story is a bit more, shall we say, intimate. And I think you'll get what I mean when if you pick up the book. And I think the romance that starts is natural, but it's very, as I mentioned, tender, and it takes its time. It takes its sweet time. Who this book is for. As I mentioned, I would not recommend this to a non-Cosmere reader. So for that, I would also not recommend it to a non-fantasy reader. I would probably say read a few more Cosmere books before you start picking this one up, just because it'll make the references mean a little bit more. It's more that it's not there and it's not that important. It's more that when it comes up consistently throughout the entire story in the form of 2 or 3 characters, I guess, and the narrator himself, I would say that that's why it's relevant. For a Cosmere reader, 100% recommend this. I mean, the only reason you would not like this book is if again, I was one of those people that I would say maybe I wouldn't like this book, but then I liked it, so then I can't even say that if you only like action, maybe don't pick this one up. I don't know how lore relevant it is to the rest of the Cosmere. I think it brings up a lot of questions, and those questions I won't say because that's somehow retroactively spoiling everything else in the Cosmere. But I'll just say it gives you more questions to think about and kind of theorize. So if you're kind of a lore theorizing kind of fan and you're not just like reading it and then being done, I would say read this book in the sense that, and you probably already have, but I would say read this book because it gives you a lot of things to think about. So overall, 5 out of 5, another straight banger. I like this more than Tress, like a lot more. I would love to see, I don't know, I think the charm of this book is that it's a one and done. Same with Tress. I don't know if I want it to just be like Tress 2, Tress 3, or Yumi 2, Yumi 3. Like I think the fact that this is a one and done story, all conclusive narrative, I think that feels good. But yeah, I hope you liked the review, and I hope you do pick up this book. Highly recommend it to any Cosmere fan that already hasn't picked it up. And I hope I keep enjoying all the rest. So thank you very much, and happy reading.